Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today. I think my first guest from Brazil, if I recall correctly, from Sao Paulo in Brazil, Simon Robinson, who's the CEO of Holonomics and author of Deep Tech and the Amplified Organization, and also another book, Customer Experiences with Soul. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Simon. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thanks, Jürgen. Yes, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Now, Mike Wittenstein, who was our guest on episode 532 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, he introduced us and suggested that we have a conversation. So a big hello to Mike.
Absolutely. He's doing some really interesting work, and I really enjoyed listening to his podcast with you.
Excellent. Yeah, that was a fun episode too. Well, like they all are, actually. But your holonomics approach, really interesting concept, and I'm really looking forward to exploring that some more. The whole idea of regenerative organizations, regenerative experiences and technologies, bringing together the kind of human experience and the technology side of it. So as I say, that's areas that I'm really interested in. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that some more. Before we get into that, though, what's the impact you're making in the world, Simon?
I do believe that if I really think about what the most fundamental part of our work is, it's really showing people that it is possible to have an impact by basing your work on the 5 universal human values of peace, truth, love, righteousness, and non-violence. And you can do that within the environment of deep technology and advanced technology. I do believe that technology should be of service to people rather than the other way around. So a lot of the time, we're really helping organizations to deeply transform their approach to how they work with their people and what their approach is to technology moving forward.
That's fabulous. And I like that you said technology should be in service of people and what we're aiming to do rather than the other way around. And I think we often lose sight of that sometimes. And that's why I talk about making marketing and making podcasting human, because in the quest to make things more efficient and adopt technology that is really helpful to us, we kind of abdicate a lot of that human interaction to the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, we're both living in very challenging times, and yet I see so much potential. And I liken the stage we're at now with technology like Web3 and the metaverse to when we were really experimenting with the mobile internet. If you think back to the first mobile internet phones, the experience was very poor. It didn't meet people's expectations. But look at what it's become now. It's completely transformed our lives. And I do see an awful lot that is problematic with certain, for example, metaverse implementations. But at the same time, I don't want to be critical. I think it's so important to encourage, especially our young designers, our young developers, our young technologists, and really try and nudge them in new directions, more creative and more deeper directions than we're currently achieving right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's one of those things, like as someone that's keen on exploring technology and how it might be used, I've always been an early adopter of new things. And sometimes, as you say, that comes with the frustrations of, oh, this doesn't do what I really want. And some of that frustration, and if I reflect back on it, I was sort of conscious of this at the time, some of that frustration is the recognition this could be this fabulous thing, but it's a long way away from that. So there's that sense of frustration of it's not anywhere near this fabulous thing it could be, but then persevering with that, as you say, and learning and growing with the technology as the technology develops means that you're pretty comfortable when it gets to the point of you can actually use it. And I think that's been the journey I've been on. So I think it's a really valid point to persevere with these things, but provide that feedback to those developers so that it brings in that set of human values that you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's been fascinating for us because I coined the phrase customer experiences with soul in 2015. And the reason I created this term was I'd been invited to do a TEDx talk. I was really trying to find the essence of what it was that I was doing and what I was creating with our consultancy. And I realized it's like, yeah, we don't just do customer experience. No, we're helping develop customer experiences with soul, helping people, helping companies design products and services that help give us a deeper experience of what it means to be human in this world. And that's where that comes from. But there was still quite a lot of resistance from especially, senior executive teams. They just didn't quite get it. And then unfortunately along came COVID and the pandemic. And it was really interesting. A number of leaders who were very familiar with our work but didn't really engage with it, they kind of started coming to us and saying, all right, I really get it now. We need to do more. We're not doing enough, not just for, say, our customers, but they realized the power of the ecosystem. Yeah, they realized that they needed to have a deeper connection with people beyond just a simple product or service offering. So now it's really interesting. This is coming back, but we're applying our customer experiences with soul approach to deep tech, and not just deep tech, but the transformation of organizations. And that's why our book's called Deep Tech and the Amplified Organization, because you can't have one without the other. You can't have digital transformation without cultural transformation and without really amplifying your impact. It's no longer just enough to be future fit, to focus on shareholder value. It's incredible the value propositions and the creativity and innovation you can come up with when you really have this expanded view of what an organization is moving forward into the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack there. I guess coming back to this idea of universal human values and their role in our society. I mean, they're kind of baked in, aren't they, into our society? And yet in a lot of these organizations or technologies, we're kind of focused either on the technology or we're focused on the financials, the return on investment, and we forget about some of those human values. So how can we put those front and center in everything we do at a personal level and also an organizational level?
Yeah, thanks. I think, first of all, we really need to understand what we mean by universal human values, because the 5 universal human values are said to be peace, truth, love, non-violence, and right action. And these can be found in the most ancient of scriptures. But why are they said to be universal? What's the universal part of human values? These are the values that are said to express the highest form of humanity. So when we as people personally are expressing all 5 universal human values in what we do and our relationships with people, that is the greatest expression of humanity that it's possible to have. But what does this mean when it comes to technology? Well, there's one interpretation of deep tech that says, well, deep tech is advanced technology, or it's complex technology, or it's technology based on scientific insights. But for us, if technology does not express or allow people to express the 5 universal human values, then it's not deep. Yeah, it's just technology. And again, I'd love to keep this conversation super positive, but we can't be naive to the kind of actions of big tech and other industries in terms of how they're potentially using and abusing social media, artificial intelligence, algorithms to impact maybe negatively and unconsciously on our lives. So this is why we truly believe that when you develop technology, when you innovate, when you're creative, from a position that comes from attempting to express these universal human values, it just has phenomenal impact. And as you said, yes, these values have always been there in society, but they haven't always been explicit. So what we're doing in our work is kind of just reminding people that this is one way of thinking of humanity as the highest expression. And it's, I think, one of the most rewarding things that I've had over the last few years is when we show the human values on at a conference, it's the most photographed slide. You know, the smartphones come up. So there's something really resonating there. And again, I think when you see the impact of the pandemic in terms of working at home, virtual working, people are getting a bit burned out. There hasn't been a more kind of profound shift in many large organizations' approach to how they work with their people, how they engage people. But those organizations that really do start to understand human values, it's been incredible. We can, you know, Maria and I in Holonomics, we've helped turn around companies, we've helped elevate their value propositions. And it's been a real inspiration to see how people within these organizations have reacted once the most senior leaders really understand the universality of these values, and how it's a way to truly connect people with the essence of what the company is doing, how they offer value to people, and the impact they're seeking to achieve. Because right now, especially if you look at ESG, for example, as an initiative, some things are working and other things are not working. And perhaps those ESG initiatives that are maybe not working, there's maybe a slight lack of articulation of human values. Maybe there's other things happening there. But as I said, it's just incredible when you really have an opportunity to allow people to go into these human values, how they interpret them, what it means to them personally, because you hear people's personal stories, which is incredible. And then you start to really shift an organization's consciousness, expand their thinking, expand their consciousness, and they start to think about value and impact in new ways. But without this discussion of values, it's very difficult to get that shift that I know so many other people are looking to achieve.
Yeah, well, you touched on something there that I think might be a bit of a positive out of the pandemic. It's people have kind of recognized that connection, the element of human connection, is so important. And when it was taken away from us, when there were lockdowns and isolation forced upon us due to the pandemic, all of a sudden we recognized that, and particularly the whole work from home phenomenon where organizations suddenly realized that, hey, if people aren't in the office and kind of having these serendipitous interactions, if you like, because they cross paths in the corridor, or they're having a chat in the kitchenette while they're picking up their tea or coffee, or sharing a ride in the elevator, whatever that might be. All of those serendipitous interactions suddenly taken away, and all of a sudden that human connection bit fell apart. And that, I think, that played into this kind of experience of maybe we need to explore more what's behind that, what is the need there, and how not only how do we connect people back with one another in this new environment, but also how do we connect them with the mission of the organisation. So I think there are a lot of those questions that came up.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because companies now many big companies have a big question with how to retain their top talent. People are resigning, people are looking to achieve new things in their lives. And one thing that's become apparent to us is that a lot of companies treat their HR departments as an operational department. It doesn't have a strategic role. It's like, payroll, it's about recruitment. And so there's a real need, I feel, for HR people to be taken much more seriously by their boards, and for the companies to recognize that they now really have to give HR a proper strategic role in the boardroom, and to really understand that it's not just about seeking new technologies, new platforms. If you don't really value the human dimension, then everything you're doing technologically, it's not going to have the results that are actually imagined. So this is why, I mentioned with Holonomics, the name of our company, it's like about wholeness. How do you treat the whole problem? So you can't separate digital transformation. And in the pandemic, a lot of companies tried to catch up with their digital transformation initiatives. Some worked, some didn't. The ones that worked understood that there's no separation between, say, cultural transformation, shifting into new ways of working, and the actual digital operating system of the business, its architectures, platform architectures, and digital systems that it uses. So this is a really important conversation that many organizations need to be having now. Really, it's time to value people properly and give HR that strategic position it deserves.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I think it applies across the board, though. And you talked about cultural transformation. I think that's an essence of the cultural transformation, is treating those functions or those roles as in service of people, in service of other humans. The other example, and I know you're big into this, you talk about customer experiences with Soul, is the customer service department or the customer experience department. That, again, I think all of what you said about human resources applies to that in most organizations. Like, you deal with customer service when there's an issue, when there's a problem. It's not something, and then there are scripts and processes that they take you through, rather than treating you as a human that has a problem that needs to be dealt with. And the faster you can deal with this problem and get on with your life, the happier you're going to be. And yet they, often there's just processes in place, and you have to go through that process, whether you like it or not, whether it's going to help you or not.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's really interesting because you would imagine that in this day and age, 2022, you would imagine that every executive would be hot on understanding the impact that the customer experience has on the perception of the brand, products and services. But it's not true. For example, not so long ago, I had a conversation with a top executive, and he just said, well, I can't focus on the customer experience because I'm focused on getting results. And I just thought, well, how can you possibly get results if people are rejecting everything that you're doing? And also, there still isn't really enough attention paid to the employee experience, because it's people that deliver customer experiences with Soul. Yeah. And so so what can I say meaningfully at this time that can have an impact? The most important thing to really help executives is to help them articulate their value proposition. Because again, sometimes we imagine that every senior executive knows how to articulate the value that their brand and their organization offers to customers and clients. But again, it's shocking the often inability of every executive to articulate that. Every executive from every single department, not just, the marketing department or the sales department. And once you really start to help people articulate value, then you can do something that then you can start entering a process that we call value proposition elevation. And what is this? This is getting away from a technology-centric view of value, thinking, oh, we've got platforms, we've got Instagram, we've got social networking, blah, blah, blah. How do we connect these technologies together? To really thinking about what is the value we offer now, and what value do we need to be offering in order to truly become a future fit organization and become able to sustain the challenges that we know are coming in a way in which develops meaningful and long-term relationships with people. and has wider impact beyond just the pure but important, financial results. So these are the kind of things we can do that are meaningful to the most senior and most influential people in an organization. Because right now, I'm sure you find this, organizations have many, many, many good people really, really wanting to do good, wanting to have more of an impact, wanting to amplify what they're doing. But there are blockages, and these blockages come from, as I said, the most senior executives not really understanding the experience they offer or the value that they provide. It's crazy. But when you get into this, then you can really start to innovate and be creative. Without doing this kind of groundwork, it's not really possible to jump into the innovation stage, which I think many people try to do. And it's good. You can start to develop things, but if it's not fully integrated into the strategy and the heart of organization, it's not going to really have this long-term impact because it won't be fully integrated into everyone's understanding of what the brand, what the organization really is, what the essence really is, because then you can't articulate that, communicate that, and align that with everyone else in the organization.
Yeah. And there's one thing you said there that I think is really key, and that's to understanding that vision and being able to articulate it. And that's looking at it from the experience that the customer actually has and the experience the customer is looking for. So looking at it through their lens. And I often find myself doing something as a customer of an organization and thinking, I don't think this organization has ever gone through that experience as a customer. They don't know what the experience is like for the customer, because there's often times where I'm really frustrated with an experience and I think, who designed this? This is really hopeless. And clearly people don't design experiences like that to frustrate their customers, and yet they forget to actually have a look at it from the customer's side as to what that might be. And then, of course, when they articulate value, if they do that work to articulate that value, it's something that's actually disconnected from what the customer is looking for.
Yeah, I mean, because again, I think a lot of companies, if I think about what you're saying, it's really interesting. A lot of companies don't really understand what experience it is or how you measure it. They're happy to do attitude surveys, for example, and maybe do the net promoter score. But I think it's really good to think about, well, what is the customer experience? And you can think about it in terms of 3 dimensions. One, was the customer successful? Did they manage to do what they set out to do? Did they go to a website and manage to buy a discounted flight at the price advertised? Were they successful? How much force was necessary? Did they really have to make an effort, or was it really simple and easy? And then there's the emotional dimension. How pleasant was it? How did that really make you feel? Did it inspire you? Did it depress you? What the emotions were going through that experience. And so this is what we do. We encourage organizations to think about their experience along those 3 dimensions. But then this is a really interesting part. How do you elevate that? Yeah, how do you elevate and create an elevated value proposition? You go into what we call lived experience. And this is very interesting when you really try and attempt to go into the lived experience of different people, because then when you do this exercise, you open up new questions about experience. So, for example, we've been involved developing some social impact technologies for education in Brazil. And we have to remember that vast numbers of people don't have access to laptops, don't have access to broadband. Yeah. So there's a lot of educational solutions that just lock out, that prevent, that other people don't have access to. But they do have access to smartphones, not iPhones, but they do have access to smartphones. But the question is, when you go into the lived experience, it's not just about how do you deliver education. What are you trying to teach them? You can ask questions like, how can you help communities develop a deeper sense of belonging to their community? How can you help develop a sense of self-esteem in people that will then inspire people that were previously excluded from technology to take part? They were previously excluded from thinking about a career in technology, a career in coding, a career in design. How can you use the technology not just to do the pure intellectual or academic teaching, but what else can you do that is necessary and important to take people on that journey, to take young people on that journey? This is deep technology. Yeah, it's not just thinking about, say, education from a mechanistic perspective. It's going into the lived experience of different communities, not just different nationalities, but really going into it at that level. That is really interesting to me, when you can ask those questions of the lived experience of those people using the technology, and you get answers that you don't necessarily expect.
That's fascinating. So how can organizations take that approach, do that analysis that helps them elevate that experience?
I think they first need to really recognize that maybe they don't necessarily have the expertise to think about experience. So the first thing we do, don't just focus on customer experience, don't just focus on the employee experience. Think about experience in terms of value, yeah? Because, I need to quote Steve Jobs. In the 90s, Steve Jobs said, don't start with the technology, start with the experience that you wish to offer. And this goes to the heart of the value proposition, yeah? Don't think of the value proposition as just part of something that marketing do that's external to your strategy. And also think about how you can help develop a sense of experience right across all the different units. So, for example, we have a customer experiences with Soul Canvas that's really designed to connect people in a networked fashion across the organization, so everyone understands their contribution to the final experience. And so I think this is the first step. Really help people understand value from an experiential perspective and understand their own personal contributions, however small. And that is where you get the systemic effects, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Then you're able to enter into, say, a deep tech discovery phase, which is where you're starting to innovate from a deeper perspective, from an expanded level of consciousness. So you can really start to ask new and deeper questions and extend your view of innovation away from just the technology needed to really think about what it is that you're offering, what is the value, and what is the experience, and what is the impact on the lived experience of people. Because this is something really that very few, say, customer experience books touch on, really going into lived experience. It's life as we live it, as we experience, as life appears to us in our personal worlds.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's a different approach to the traditional. And I guess one of the things you talked about, companies often have a mission statement or a vision statement, and the ones that make better use of it than just a one-time exercise and then it goes into a drawer somewhere, or maybe it's a poster on the wall somewhere, they manage to communicate it within the organization, and people actually understand, or people know what the vision statement or mission statement is, and there's some sense of alignment around that. But what you're talking about is taking that to, here's the lived experience. So how can we kind of take that idea of that lived experience, articulate it in a way that really is just a really clear snapshot that everybody in the organization can understand? And then, to me, then it's, okay, every interaction I'm having, whether it's inside the organisation or outside the organisation, is that congruent with this ideal lived experience?
I think I'm trying to, that's a great question, because I'm trying to think how we actually work. And one thing that our approach to strategy is a little bit different. Yeah. And this is one, Maria, my wife, who's also the CEO of Holonomics in Brazil, she's an expert in strategy and strategy execution. And one thing she's always said is that strategy is a way of organizing conversations. Now, this is very, very different to thinking about strategy as the final outcome of what you wish the organization to do. There's a kind of change of perspective here to understand strategy as a way of organizing conversations. And how do we do that? We do that through strategy mapping and understanding strategy from multiple perspectives: finance, sustainability, customers, markets, internal processes, and people and culture. And I think leadership, when you take that approach, it's not easy, but you have to then have experts in facilitating conversations and facilitating dialogue. And when you do that, and you have to do that you have to find a way to do this with everyone in the organization. So, for example, the typical business tools used by executives and senior managers, that's not going to work for the people who are maybe further down the organizational hierarchy. But you don't have to dumb things down. You respect people. You think about their lived experience, and you use things like visual storytelling. Yeah, we work a lot visually and with stories. And a story is a way to capture all the complexity of a strategy in a way that articulates the interconnections, but in a way that can be meaningful to people who don't necessarily have this business background, or maybe more privileged, educational background that maybe people higher up the organization have. So yeah, if I go to the real essence of what we're doing in Holonomics, it's helping people to understand strategy as a way of organizing conversations and thereby fully aligning people through a completely different way to thinking about communication. That's how you get to the heart of it.
That's a fascinating insight and fascinating kind of reframe of strategy, because often organizations think of strategy, it's something you kind of, it's an operational plan, really, isn't it?
They think of strategy as the outcome, the what. That's it. They often just think of strategy as the what. This is an important part. Yeah, I'm not denying that this is an important part of the what you're going to do. But then there's also strategy of how you do it and how you conceive what is the essence of strategy. It's alignment, around an understanding of what you're going to do. Because again, it's possible to have conversations with, the most senior of executives, and they can complain, our people don't understand the strategy. It's like, well, have you ever communicated it? Well, no. Well, how do you know that people are actually doing what they should be doing if you haven't really attempted to, communicate it or align? You still find these basic things.
And it all comes back to what we talked about earlier, this connection between people in the organization, and then of course the connection to the customer to provide that elevated experience right throughout, in all of those interactions, which is kind of at the heart of your philosophy, I think, of Holonomics. And the communication part is really critical there. So I love the strategy as a way to organise all the conversations, because those conversations have to be ongoing, right? You talked about facilitated for everybody. but then on a day-to-day basis, those conversations have to continue in terms of, okay, well, how do we do this now? How do we implement that? And that might be a conversation between 2 or 3 people rather than the whole organization. So having a strategy around how are they going to take place. Yeah.
And this really transforms even the most biggest organization, because how did organizations do strategy maybe 20 years ago? In October, November, they would start to have their conversations. They'd have these big annual meetings. Everyone would contribute, and they, maybe by February, March, they would have their strategy for the year, which would begin to be put in operation, well, in the UK anyway, in April, the start of the organization's financial year. And then they would execute that strategy and then look at the outcome of that strategy a year later. You can't do that anymore. You have to be far more agile. You have to be able to react to an ever-changing economic landscape and social landscape. And when you do set up your organization as a living organization, and the livingness comes through the transmission of information and data and meaningful conversations, then you can really start to become far more agile. But again, in addition, the only real way to achieve agility is through human values. Because when you have values, you honor people, you respect people, other people honor others and respect others, and you don't need massive swathes of bureaucracy and rules, because people are living through values. They don't have to be told what to do and controlled. You have this level of trust because they are fully aligned and engaged and, living the mission, because they are genuinely empowered and having an impact.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, this is fabulous. I mean, we could go on for ages digging deeper into deep tech and holonomics and whole customer experience thing. I think it's a good point now, though, to move on to the buzz, and we will refer back to the books later on so people can dig deeper themselves. The buzz is our innovation round, same 5 questions that I ask of every guest, and the idea is you'll give us some really insightful answers and inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today. So you all set?
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Now, the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative.
For me, the only thing I really do when I start is think about what is the experience we're wishing to provide. I think nowadays there's so much technology available in different formats. If you can get lost in technology, we've touched on this before. So really start with the experience and think about value. Think about the value you're trying to offer people first and foremost as an experience that you're offering. And then other things will start to fall into place. The technology will fall into place based on this more fundamental element that you're trying to innovate and achieve.
Yeah, I love it. And it also focuses back on what we were talking about earlier, the whole idea of that human connection and the experience that you want them to have as the core of the value. And then people ultimately say, oh, we can provide that experience with this technology or with that technology. Or no, we don't have the technology to provide that, so we'll develop something.
Yeah, no, exactly.
All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
If I think about my own creative process, I've become far more disciplined in writing my ideas down as soon as I have them. I have lost so many ideas. And I think the other thing that I do when I write the ideas down, I'm quite an intuitive person. And by that, I don't mean, I think I have a feeling about what's going to happen in the future. No, by intuition, it's a kind of precognitive idea that you can't necessarily immediately articulate. But maybe if you just, I try and jot down the essence of the idea as best as possible, and then I can come back to it. And sometimes I've been so convinced I can remember an idea And, the following day, it's incredible what I've forgotten because
very...
I was operating from this creative space of intuition, more of the scientific intuition. So I get it down, and then something in what I've written can trigger the reminder of that intuitive idea. And then you have to spend a lot of force, taking it from that intuition to something that can be articulated and shared.
Yeah, I love it. And I can certainly empathize with that. I often get these ideas when I'm doing something completely different. So they're obviously coming from somewhere in the unconscious, which is kind of, you can describe as intuition, I guess. But if you don't capture them in that moment, then just as easily, and as you described, they kind of go back into the unconscious, and then that's where they are. They're unconscious. You don't know about them. I find I use my smartwatch now because often I'm out riding the bike, and of course I don't want to stop and ruin my average to write something down. And I've learned how to do a voice prompt, record the thought I've had, and then I can come back to it later and do, as you said, you sort of, okay, I remember that now. All right. Do you have a favourite resource? I've just shared one of mine. Do you have a favourite resource you use most often?
Yeah, I'm almost a bit embarrassed to say this, but it is the physical Post-it notes. And I'm a great one. I'm a little bit embarrassed. I know I should be citing some kind of software, but I'm a great one for writing things down. And I tell you, but what I do, it's just this kind of embodied way of moving things around and seeing new patterns, seeing new relationships. If I'm really trying to organize my thinking. So I do that. And the other thing I will do, especially in this I've had a lot of virtual conversations that have been creative. So it's actually the record function on Google Meet. There are many times when, as I said, I've articulated an idea, and then someone has said, oh, you should write that down. And I cannot, even though it's literally a few seconds afterwards, I can't remember it. So I've had quite a few times where I've just known in advance that I should be recording a conversation. So I use the record function on Google Meet, and you've got the idea there, because when you're in the zone, again, my own creative processes, I can articulate things at times, but I'm in that state of flow. And it's very difficult to go from a state of flow when you can articulate something to then remembering that when you come out of that state of flow. So I do that together. Those two things the most.
That's great.
If we talk about if we talk about innovation and creativity, those are the two things, especially I've been using over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I love the idea of recording conversations. I really love that. And I find myself often in a conversation, I can articulate something that if I then sit down to write that out, it just doesn't come out that well. So I've been recording conversations like you, and I then use some transcription software and pull out the relevant transcription bits, and then all of a sudden I go, oh, that's really good. I just need to pull out all my ums and you knows, which are my favourite filler words, and then I can work on that and maybe craft a message a little bit more from there, but I've got a great starting point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's interesting. We actually wrote our book, Deep Tech and the Amplified Organization, at the very start of the pandemic. And we weren't able to meet up physically as I would have loved. But yeah, a lot of that came out of, we recorded the conversations to record things that we knew we were going to talk about anyway. But then deeper, different insights just came out naturally. And we had all of that recorded. So it just really speeded up the writing process.
Yeah, love it. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track?
Oh, the one, if I think what I do explicitly, it's really, you have to continually check assumptions. You don't just check assumptions when you're maybe putting together a proposal. You have to continually check assumptions, because you just cannot align people around expectations unless you are able to have mature discussions around the assumptions that people are making. I think where the projects I've been involved in, many years ago have maybe not worked out is because different parties had different expectations and different assumptions. But you have to do this continually because it's amazing. Things can creep up on you unawares during a complex project. You may think everyone's thinking the same way, that you're on the same sheets, but you're not.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love because kind of we have different views of what's going on inside of a project team. And so we make those assumptions, which already is a potential flaw unless we check that assumption. But then we make an additional assumption. Once we've taken that step, we kind of make an additional assumption that, okay, everybody's aligned with that and they will be right throughout the duration of this project. And yet that assumption probably needs to be challenged quite regularly.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because people have enough challenges because they're already embedded in their kind of departmental mental model. And then you have the project challenges on top of that, the project assumptions. So you continually have to bring people together, for dialogue to make sure everyone really understands where you're heading.
Excellent. All right, final question. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
When I think about what frustrates me in this kind of age in which we're living, it can be the things that frustrate me are those things that are superficial. I don't want to be too negative on this, but if I was to offer people advice, it's don't be afraid to go deep. Yeah, don't be afraid to be philosophical, because a lot of people think of, say, philosophy as arguing about things, talking about things, discussing things. But for me, my great discovery maybe in the last 10 years is that philosophy is a way of seeing. And the reason why the most difficult philosophical books are difficult to read is because you're trying to intellectualize it, but it's not. That people are talking about a different way of seeing. So if you can enter into that way of seeing, then it just really opens up new levels of creativity. So yeah, differentiate by being deep. Don't get stuck in the often superficial aspects of our modern world. Be brave. Go deep.
Yeah, be brave, go deep. Yeah, there's a lot in that too, and it's an interesting thought. I must revisit some of those philosophical books that I put aside because I thought this is really hard going, and approach it with that mindset. See what happens. Well, thanks, Simon. This is.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, no. I mean, this has been our approach from day one. Our consultancy work is founded on both universal human values and deep philosophical insights that we then translate into ways of working with people. So it can be a bit scary. You can feel a bit alone going down this path, but don't be afraid, because that's how the best people innovate, through this deeper source of creativity.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Simon. A really enjoyable and insightful conversation. It's been really great. Now, where can people find out more about you and the work you do, and also get a hold of the 2 books? And I know you publish a lot of articles as well.
Yeah, we have our website, holonomics.co, but also getting in touch with me. I use LinkedIn a lot. And as I said, please check out our book, Deep Tech and the Amplified Organization. We've really written it in a way to help people understand, this new thinking, the new frameworks necessary. And we really hope it inspires people as well with everything that we've put into it.
Excellent. Well, Simon, what action would you like our listener to take away from our conversation today?
I think some business leaders have said to us, oh, it's wonderful for you to talk about your values, but it's not possible for us as leaders to operate from the same values that we have at home in business. And what I say is that no, it's absolutely possible. So the action is always base everything you do on your values. I'm not going to tell people what their values are, but this will always protect you and it will always guide you when everything you do comes from your values. When we move away from our own value system, that's when things get out of sync in our lives. So do that, and that will always guide you. Life has been very rough for a lot of people, a lot of companies. It's going to continue to be rough. But, you know, the thing that will always anchor you is when you base everything you do in your values.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we have the choice to either challenge our values if we feel as though perhaps things have changed and there's something that we have to explore there, or to go into an environment that's consistent and congruent with our values. And I know I've had an experience where in hindsight, I didn't recognize it at the time, but in hindsight, I have learned that the 2 years where I was really unhappy, the core reason behind that was that the values shift in the organization had been such that there were key things that were totally at odds with my own personal values. And that when you're in that kind of situation, that's not really good. So operating from your own values and being really clear about what they are and what actions you're taking, that will serve you well.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, this is fundamental for our company because we work with challenging organizations, but these are challenging organizations that have recognized a necessity for change and transformation in some way. And at the same time, we have said no to working with other organizations where those core values just weren't there. So it's when you live your values, you know when to say yes, and you really know when to say no. Maybe you're struggling with the dilemma, but deep down, it's your values that guide these difficult decisions. Sometimes it's not necessarily obvious at the surface, but at a deeper level, it is.
Great. Well, great advice. And finally, Simon, who else should I get on the show and why?
I was thinking about this, and I think there's someone very interesting that could offer a lot to the podcast, and this is Nicole Norris. I've known Nicole for a number of years now. I really respect her and the work that she's doing because she's really focused on business model innovation for a flourishing world. And right now she's a design manager at the Center for Changemaking and Social Innovation at Georgian College in Ontario. And I think you could have a really interesting, wide-ranging conversation about, well, what's she doing, especially around innovation and social impact and inclusion. That would be a very interesting conversation, you know, knowing Nicole.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll get you to introduce us to Nicole and reach out to her. So look forward to that conversation as well.
Absolutely. I think that would be a great one.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today, Simon. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we've dug as deep as we can in the short time that we've had our conversation, and I'm sure that people will find this interesting enough that they will have all those links in the show notes. They can go check out your website, your various publications, your books, of course, and maybe even get in touch and say thanks for what you've shared today. I've really enjoyed it immensely. I'm looking forward to sharing this with my audience. So thanks a lot, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jürgen. It's been absolutely fantastic. Really great conversation today. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you.